won big in South Carolina, but is he now the inevitable candidate? We'll talk to a top journalist who says not so fast. Then Hillary's back after dealing a setback to Bernie Sanders in Nevada, but is she still vulnerable? And Chris Christie, he's off the campaign trail and back in the Garden State. Question is he returning to a state and a Republican Party in turmoil? Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thank you so much for joining us. The Republican Nevada caucus is just a day away, and after a big win in South Carolina, Donald Trump is sure sounding even more confident than usual. This morning, Donald Trump on a victory lap following a big win in South Carolina, saying he's attracting GOP voters in all shapes and sizes.
We won with everything. Tall people, short people, fat people, skinny people, just won.
In Atlanta, the lights went out on Trump, but couldn't stop his power over the crowd.
They didn't pay the electric bill. To put him, oh, I like that much better. And because the lights didn't work, I won't pay the rent. So we get better lighting and we don't pay the rent, right?
Trump on a roll after his back-to-back wins. The whole Trump family on the victory stage in South Carolina. Even wife Melania leading the charge for the next contest.
We love you. And to be going ahead to Nevada.
Hoping to limit those Trump celebrations, Senator Marco Rubio, who barely won second place in South Carolina. Rubio hit 3 states on Sunday, speaking to some of his biggest crowds and unveiling a new message.
America is a nation in which in our veins flows the blood of people who refuse to accept the limits placed upon them by a stale and outdated society.
But Senator Ted Cruz is telling Rubio not so fast, mocking Rubio's appearance on This Week with George Stephanopoulos.
He was asked, what state can you win? And the answer he gave is, he said, well, I think we could win Florida on March 15th. Now, that's a fairly amazing admission that they don't believe they're going to win here in Nevada.
All 3 candidates hoping to gain supporters from Jeb Bush, who dropped out of the race following a weak showing in South Carolina.
A number of the pundits said, well, if a couple of the other candidates dropped out, if you add their scores together, it's going to equal Trump. Right? These geniuses, they're geniuses. They don't understand that as people drop out, I'm going to get a lot of those votes also. You don't just add them together.
All right, for more on this, let's bring in John Fund, national affairs columnist for the National Review. All right, I mean, your headline of your piece says it all. Reports of Trump's inevitability are greatly exaggerated. Usually the word demise is inserted there instead of inevitability, but wouldn't the Trump people just turn around and say, hey, you tell me somebody who's ever won New Hampshire and South Carolina and hasn't been the nominee, history is on our side. Why would they be wrong?
Tell me anyone who has ever won New Hampshire and South Carolina with a lower percentage of the vote other than Pat Buchanan.
Fair enough. Their argument's going to be, and trust me, I don't like making their argument, but their argument's going to be all these people who do the remaining math from a bloated field that now has been winnowed down and assuming that every time a candidate drops out, their support goes to someone else, is living in a fantasy land. Why isn't it right that if Kasich drops out, if this gets down to 3 candidates, that the field basically, that the votes get divvied up in a reasonable allotment, like in most campaigns?
Could happen, but Donald Trump is a unique character, as we've discovered this year. You know, we had 12 candidates before Iowa. Now we're down to 5. Trump's percentage has gone from 24% in Iowa to 35% in New Hampshire to 32% in South Carolina. He has yet to break a ceiling of about 35%. Only 4 out of 10 Republican voters, according to the latest Associated Press poll, have a favorable opinion of him. I think he has a high floor and a low ceiling, and he hasn't yet demonstrated that he goes above about a third of the vote.
His supporters will say, hey, listen, we're going to do great in these winner-take-all states, but explain how the format works, John, and how, as you say in your piece, this thing wasn't designed to have basically an anointed nominee by mid-March.
No, this process was designed to last a fairly long time. There are only 9 winner-take-all states. 2 of them are home state favorites for John Kasich, Ohio, and Marco Rubio, Florida. If Marco Rubio can't carry Florida, I agree, he's got real problems. So the winner-take-all states are a small part of the total pie. California, New York, Texas, those are not winner-take-all states. So if you don't have many winner-take-all states, you're not going to get a majority of the delegates if you stay at 35% of the vote. In fact, you're probably going to need about 45 or 46% of the popular vote to get a majority of the delegates before the convention.
I see the math. I get the math, John. But how much of the resistance from establishment Republicans to Trump is he'll implode, just give him time here, or you know what, this makes absolutely no sense by any metric or historical measurement we've ever seen. This guy's platforms that actually are resonating. How much of it do you think is wishful thinking that he'll just fade away?
Well, how much of it is wishful thinking by Donald Trump that he's going to sweep every primary like he says on March the 1st? How much of it is wishful thinking on the part of his campaign co-chair who says we're now in a single-man race? I mean, talk about overconfidence. So, look, we don't know until the voters vote. We do know this. There's only one major Republican candidate who consistently loses to Hillary Clinton. That's Donald Trump. CRUZ and Rubio actually lead Hillary Clinton. So as we get closer and closer, and as the Supreme Court now looms as a bigger and bigger issue, we're not just voting on the presidency in November, we're voting on the Supreme Court. I think people will look for electability. And if Donald Trump continues to trail Hillary Clinton, that will be a factor.
If you were to put odds on it, John, do you think we are headed for a contested convention? And you're pretty connected here. If we do have that, are all bets off at that point?
Look, I'm not a bookmaker, but I think that no one is going to leave the primaries with a majority. That means in the first ballot, the delegates are pledged to the candidate who won their state or district, and then they're free. And at that point, the jostling begins. I do think that with 60% of the general public having very negative views about Donald Trump, with him only winning 17% of the Hispanic vote, I think a lot of Republicans are going to think 3 or 4 times before they nominate someone who performs so poorly outside of his base.
Last thing, if he becomes, as much as I can sense the distaste attached to it, if he becomes the party's nominee, does the party at the end of the day hold their nose and rally around the flag? Or do they say, I just can't do it. The net negatives to this party in November are going to be so much worse, we just can't get behind Donald Trump?
Well, I'm not saying Donald Trump can't win in November. In fact, I think the problem that the conservative movement will have will be if he wins in November, because I think that will fundamentally change the nature of the conservative movement away from what Ronald Reagan and William F. Buckley and Barry Goldwater talked about. So I think the party always sticks together. Look at George McGovern. The vast majority of people stuck with George McGovern when he won the Democratic nomination. I think that will hold true for Donald Trump. But remember, a lot of Republicans are running in moderate Democratic states. The Senate is up for grabs. A lot of them will probably not show up on the platform of Donald Trump, even if they informally or formally endorse him.
Good enough. Hey, John, I appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Pleasure.
All right, let's bring in our panel right now. Jeannie Zaino, professor of political science at Iona College, professor of campaign management at NYU, Dominic Carter, political journalist and author, and Andrew Whitman, senior political correspondent. Dominic, I think we're on the same page on this one in that I like John Fund, I respect John, but I think he's listening to his heart more than his head here. And I think a lot of Republicans are, which is they can't, and I think for understandable reasons, get their arms around the idea that Donald Trump could be, and I think would be the odds-on favorite tonight, as the odds-on favorite to be the nominee for the Republican Party, and they just don't want to believe it. Mathematically, though, they're not crazy to say he won't get the magic number of delegates, but you still say they got to wake up here because it's more likely than not Donald Trump's their guy.
I like the term that you use referring to John. You said what was the term
his
again?
Heart. He's listening to his heart, not his head.
He's listening to his heart, not his head. Okay, so rather than criticize people like John and others that are on the far right and would rather die than see Donald Trump win the nomination, I'll say he's listening to his heart rather than his head. Richard, it's over.
I don't think it's over.
Richard, it's over. Finito. Done. Trump is, whether you like it or not. I have family members that won't speak to me because I tell them that Trump is going to be the Republican nominee. You might not speak to me after this show. Richard, after Super Tuesday, after a week from now, who's going to stop him? Who's going to stop him?
Okay, but do the math like John says, which is the way the Republican, unlike the Democrats, the way that the Republican primary calendar works, there are winner-take-all states, and they're proportional ones, as we know. it's not intended to end in the middle of March here. And the fact that there are favorite Sun states, Ohio, let's just play the game that Kasich carries Ohio. Florida goes to Marco Rubio, where he's the odds-on favorite, one would think. And Texas goes for CRUZ. They could get to Cleveland, where you will be, my friend, and nobody's going to have the magic number they need, and this whole idea of a broker convention isn't just an Aaron Sorkin plot line.
It's one way to make Cleveland more entertaining in July. Look, that's possible. You're absolutely right. The math plays out that way.
Crazy.
And it's possible. It's not crazy. The problem is, and I'm not quite prepared to go as far as Dominic and say it's over, but it's getting late awfully early. And here's the problem. Rubio hadn't won a state yet. He might be able to win Florida as you go down the road, and maybe he gets better as the field consolidates, but Kasich is still taking votes away from Rubio, and Carson is still taking votes away from CRUZ. And by the time that they sort this whole thing out, Trump might be to such a lead that they can't catch him. It's more likely than not, I think, if I was a betting man today, that Trump goes into Cleveland as the presumptive nominee of the Republican Party. There's just, I don't know if there's enough time for everything to get all straightened out. And you know, Rubio needs to actually show that he can win some states. Right now, Ted Cruz is the only other guy who's won any primaries or a caucus on the Republican side.
What did you take away, Jeannie, from South Carolina that you thought was really telling? Not just that Trump won, right? But was there any of the numbers that came out, any of the demographics that you said, wow, you know, because if you think New Hampshire and South Carolina, two polar opposites in terms of demographics and everything else, he's winning different constituencies. It's not just what we've always been saying to each other or telling each other. It's not just this crazy niche here that is voting for him. Everybody says the ceiling is 30, 35%. I don't know. It can go higher, right?
Yeah, I think I was working the exit polls Saturday night and looking at that data coming in, and I was working them for New Hampshire. It is shocking how much he has been able to revive the Reagan coalition, and I think that's what really surprised me. So he wins every demographic, including evangelicals, white evangelicals, young, old, men, women. He wins them all except for people with a college degree or higher. That's where he is still suffering a little bit. But he has masterfully put back together this Reagan coalition, and that's where he's getting a lot of support. He's re-energized people who were not voting in the last several election cycles.
But help me, because I've underestimated him. Okay, I'll be the first to say
Me
it. But when you say masterfully in Trump, I've listened to more Donald Trump than I defy the vast, vast majority out you and these pressers and everything else. All he talks about is his poll numbers. All he talks about, he'll come up with one soundbite like Dominic says every day. It has nothing to do with policy. It has nothing to do with what he's going to do for the country other than make it great again. Talked about building a wall, talked about keeping out Muslims, which nobody thinks is realistic in any way, shape, or form. My point is, when we say he massively has coalesced the Reagan coalition, around what idea? What's the messaging that's working for him? I don't get it. It's an obnoxious rich guy from New York, which tends to turn off everybody with bad hair. What's the hook?
You look at the qualities people want in a candidate. They want somebody who says it like it is. That is their guy. They think on the big issues that matter to them, he is their guy. He killed the other ones in terms of the economy. He does incredibly well on the issue of immigration. So he has the qualities and he's right on the issues and he is moving them forward. So just look at the issue of Muslims who aren't American entering the United States, banning them. 3/4 of people who turned out said they absolutely support that, and that is all Donald Trump. So he has been able to put this together. Now, I agree with you. He says nothing, and it is very frustrating about policy or governing. I don't think he has a clue what he's going to do when he gets in, if he does. But he's still able to move these people out. And let's not forget, my one caveat on this is South Carolina, 97% white, the turnout among Republicans. That's huge. You can't win a national election that way, and that's going to be his big sticking point if he gets the nomination.
His lack of specificity is one of the reasons why his appeal is as broad as it is, because except for those big issues, except for Mexico and except for the Muslims, you can, and we've seen Republican voters wrap his views around theirs and say that they're in sync, and they have no idea. Whether it's on job creation. Oh yeah, I support Trump thinks the same way that I do on job creation. We're talking about some other people who are taking some other ethnic and racial shortcuts this morning, and they think that Trump's their guy. He hasn't said he's their guy. He hasn't really given a lot of breadcrumbs or laid a lot of breadcrumbs to explain why he's their guy. But because he hasn't said anything, people can say like, oh yeah, because he's got my angle.
And I totally agree with that. It's not just because he hasn't said anything, because he's not a politician. He's never run, and he's never held office. He has no record to run on, so you can't hold him accountable.
Where you have video and audio tape, they're the most antithetical thing to these same people who vote for him.
Yeah, but listen to what he says when you pin him on that. Oh, I was a businessman at that time, and he gets a pass. That's what he's been saying.
What do you think Dominic's more likely? In the next few weeks, forget about what happens in South Carolina where he's expected to win and win big. Do Republican establishment take him down more a peg or two, or do they start to in some way legitimize him?
Well, they can't. What could they do to take him down? They've
already do a million.
No, I don't think so,
Sure
Richard.
you can.
Richard, there is a movement behind Trump. We may not like it. The pundits may not like it.
No. But if you listen, here's my only point.
The people.
Republicans across this country that are up for re-election in November.
Right.
You talk to the Pat Toomey's of the world here. You talk to Senator Ayotte up in New Hampshire and the rest of them. They are petrified about what this is going to mean for him. Here's what we do know. If Donald Trump is the nominee, Hillary Clinton will make it clear through surrogates and everyone else, through hundreds of millions of dollars of advertising, how much of a failure he was in business and the amount of stories that we plastered out there. All the stuff that you talk about, literally the garage full of skeletons in the closet, they'll come tumbling out. All the people on the Republican side that'll learn, wait a minute, this guy's for Planned Parenthood, he's pro-choice, even late-term abortions, he's, he spoke out against guns on numerous kids. I can keep going on every single litany here. There'll be an information overload where you can't turn on the TV and not hear something bad about Trump,
Richard,
regardless of what side you're in.
Richard, if he's the nominee, he's going to neutralize Bill Clinton where Bill Clinton doesn't count. He's going to possibly put Rubio on his ticket, which will energize the base, and he will get a larger Latino vote than the media expected. Don't write, I'm saying this as objectively as possible.
Fair enough.
Don't write this man off.
But can I just say, though, it doesn't matter who the Republicans put up. If they can't get Latinos and Hispanics, I agree with you, they can't. And women, it is a math game. It is over. They're going to lose the Senate and the White House. The Republican Party is not against Trump for those. They're against him because they don't think he can win the general election.
Best line, by the way, of the weekend, Al Sharpton. Do you know what he called Donald Trump? The White Dawn King. I thought that was just so spot on. Same here, too. All right, coming up next, we're going to pivot to Democrats. Hillary coming off a big win, as you know, in Nevada. But if you dig into how she got there, it was great politics. But I don't know if that groundswell is as much there as some people want to believe. We're going to talk about what lies ahead here going forward.